All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's Rising Tide Foundation lecture, where we're continuing our symposium, really exploring the different aspects of, my camera's going a little bit haywire there. Let's just turn that off. Sorry about that. We've been exploring different aspects of the role and power of art to cultivate citizens. And I mean citizens from the highest standpoint and meaning of that term. Sovereign nations are obviously have been under attack, are under attack. This is not a new thing. But the reason why sovereign nations as a mechanism in terms of, a new institution that emerged out of the Renaissance, the reason why these are considered such threats to certain forces that would like to restore some sense of romanticized feudalism, maybe with a bit of a technocratic twist, is because it emerged out of the concept that human beings have a power and a purpose which is not found within oligarchical structures that try to define human beings, kind of as you would some form of cattle on a plantation. The idea that we could actually self-organize willfully and create our laws that are much more conducive and dignified to a creative moral life was something that could have only emerged because of a certain type of set of ideas and a certain type of fight that emerged with not only things like the Peace of Westphalia, but also, as I mentioned, and I think as everybody knows, the American Revolution itself, and the whole concept of a society which is founded upon the consent of the governed and for the general welfare of all people. So every individual has to be sovereign for this to work. So to be sovereign means you can't be a subject. You have to be a true citizen. And that means you have to appreciate how do you actually think for yourself? How do you use the power of mind to see behind the surface of things? And how do you take a standard of aesthetic beauty, a sensitivity to real beauty and truth that allows you to penetrate behind the veil of appearances of things which often might look nice on the surface, but carry in their, behind the surface, something ugly. So without a sense of beauty, of ugliness, it's difficult for the mind to navigate through that minefield and actually see the essence and substance of reality as it is. Hence, art, literature, music, and the battlegrounds that culture has played. So we've been looking at different aspects of this for the past several years of these symposiums, but really the last several weeks of this particular one. So Dr. Quan Le, I think everybody knows, has watched at least one of his past presentations. They know that Quan is somebody who has thought deeply about matters of history, philosophy, politics, culture, and has a lot to say, or actually doesn't always have a lot to say, but when he does speak, it resonates. And I think we're going to have a lively conversation today. There's going to be a lot of new ideas. I'm looking forward to learning some new things. And as usual, when after the opening remarks, when people have any thought, they would like to share a question for Dr. Le, just put your name in the chat box and I'll call upon you on cue. Quan, it's all yours.
Thanks, Matt. And once again, thank you to everyone for coming tonight. So, as usual, I repeat the title of my presentation, Ode to the Orange Tree and the Night Banquet, meaning those are the two metaphors for the aristocratic man's souls and the plutocratic man's intellect. And once again, I want to repeat the definition by Plato of what is an aristocratic man. An aristocratic man is not born into a certain family, but he worked on himself. So he reached to the level that is motivated by discovery, inventivity, creativity, and playful exploration. So because of this attitude, the world and the universe is not a place to conquer for him, but a playground to understand and to explore. His polar opposite is the plutocratic man. That man is motivated by power, wealth, and profits. He has a potential soul, but he did not work on himself to make that soul activated. So what he has is an intellect. The intellect is the biological machine that all animals are endowed with, and especially in our human species, that machine is very powerful. And in a nutshell, the intellect is formed by images, by words, and by concept. So the plutocratic man is much more capable because he mastered the concept, the images, and the words. Because with those words, images, and concept, he would be capable to organize and to conquer and to dominate. And most of the time, he would be capable to mesmerize the democratic man. And once again, democratic man is understood according to Plato or for Confucius or to Confucius. The democratic man is motivated by hedonism, lex talionis, and lex talionis means eye for eye and tooth for tooth, tribal affinities, and his understanding of the inner reality and the outer reality is limited to senses perception. Of course, he has a certain intellect, but not as developed as the intellect of the plutocratic man. Hence, he's a good follower of the plutocratic man and is very easily manipulated by the plutocratic man through the two typical tools, bread and circuses, or to be more precise, bread and circus on one side and punishment on the other side. So today I would like to talk about a famous poem in the Chinese world called The Ode to the Orange Tree, which has been written by Qu Yuan. Qu is written by the Pinyin transliteration system as QU, but for English speaking people, you can imagine Qu as CHU with an umlaut, a diaresis, okay, two dots on the U. Qu, that's his family name, and Yuan, Yuan. Qu Yuan was born on January 14, 339 BCE, and he died on 278 BCE, 61 years later. Qu Yuan is part of one of the three major family of the southern Chu kingdom. During the Eastern Zhou dynasty era, meaning during the period from 770 BCE to 256 BCE, the Chu kingdom was one of the seven major kingdoms contending for the empire. During Qu Yuan's lifetime, his kingdom was at a nexus because it was the last occasion for that kingdom to possibly gain the empire against its main opponent, the Qin Empire. And I think that all of you probably guessed that the Qin Empire won because China is coming from Qin precisely. Qin, China in Sanskrit, and China in English. So Qu Yuan failed to assist his king and cousin to restore their kingdom, but he stayed a major figure in Chinese civilization because he was born in the Chinese oligarchy of landowners, the Qu branch being one of the three major branches of the Mi family, and the Mi family is the family giving the kings to the Chu kingdom. And the other two major cadet branch of the royal house of Chu are the Jing and the Zhao. So Qu Yuan is special because he was born a plutocrat, but he wanted to create a system in which it's possible to work for the common good, or maybe in modern word and maybe a little bit of a misnomer, the republic, but let's say the common good, because the common good would be acceptable as an expression 23 centuries ago. Then, so quite interestingly, he fell as a statesman, as Confucius 2 centuries before. But as Confucius, he succeeded beyond expectations as a teacher and a philosopher. And I would say that his poem, Ode to the Orange Tree, is the perfect allegory for the epistemological growth. And speaking of allegory, I cannot prevent myself to make the rapprochement with the other allegory famous in the Western world and in the whole world, not only the Western world, meaning the allegory of the cave by Plato. And allegory is a use practical and concrete realities to illustrate the more abstract psychological, spiritual realities. So as Plato used the cave and the prisoners in the cave as a vivid image for the epistemological growth, Qu Yuan used the orange tree as a vivid image, a metaphor for the soul of the aristocratic man. And before going further, I would like to read 2 lines from Qu Yuan. Those lines are not from the poem, but are from his other words. Mean, Lu man man qi xiu yuan xi, wu jiang shang xia qiu suo. And it means the road ahead is long, I can see no end, but I urge on to seek my vanished longing. And that is 2 very beautiful lines illustrating the adventure, the journey on the epistemological growth. And without further ado, I would like to talk about the poem, Ode to the Orange Tree. That a poem is in a classical form of his time, meaning 23 centuries ago, meaning that you have 2 distichs of 4 Chinese characters, meaning you have a distich of 2, a series of distichs of 2, and each distich is formed by 2 lines, and each line is formed by 4 Chinese characters. So those distichs are 8 Chinese characters. And you have, it's a poem of about 150 Chinese characters. So it's not a very long poem, but it's a very dense poem. Before I forget, because it's a detail, but it's a detail that might be interesting. The Dragon Boat Festival is commemorated each year on the 5th day of the 5th Chinese month in his honor. So I wanted to mention it before I forget. So let's begin by I want to discuss in detail with some comments on the Chinese characters about the 16 first characters, okay? Because it can be understood very simply, and I would read a simple translation, and it's not a wrong translation, okay? Because as in every culture, Chinese poems have many layers of interpretation. That is obvious, okay? It's the same in English, in French, in German, in Italian, etc. So I would read first the one possible English translation at the first layer, okay, of the 16 first characters. And after that, I will discuss the second possible layer. Orange tree, nurtured by nature, born to be adaptable to the soil and water here. Since you were given the mission not to move, you would live forever in this southern state. Okay, in Chinese is 后皇家树举来福系，寿命不见生难国系. So the first layer of character is a praise of the orange tree and the fact that that orange tree is a southern product of that land. And precisely that southern Chu kingdom was very powerful and very rich. And if you look at a historical map of that time, the land of that Chu kingdom is equivalent to all the other all the all, to all the land of the other six kingdoms together. Okay, just to show that if the Qin nobility was not so relentless and so organized, the natural winner of the race to empire would have been Chu and not Qin. But history sometimes can be quite ironical because even if the Qin kingdom created the first Chinese empire and the form of government for the next 21 centuries for China, that first empire lasted only for 15 years. And the next empire, the second Chinese empire, the Han Empire, having lasted 4 centuries, has been created by a peasant coming from the Chu kingdom. So sometimes history has a way to remind us that l'homme propose, mais Dieu dispose, meaning that man is doing what he can, but God is deciding at the end. So the second layer of Hou Huang Jia Shu Ju Lai Fu Si Shou Ming Bu Qian Sheng Nan Guo Si is obvious for anyone reading Chinese that it's an invitation to epistemological growth. Okay, but let's start with the first four Chinese characters. Hou Huang Jia Shu, that in the ordinary translation can be simply rendered as, oh, behold that beautiful tree. All right. Oh, behold that beautiful tree on the first interpretation level. If you read each character will be transformed into, here begins your journey for a majestic and sovereign mind. Okay, so it's a completely different, because I wouldn't explain each Chinese character. How is the character for sovereign, okay? And Huang is the character for august or majestic. Jia is the character for excellent or outstanding. And Shu is the character for tree, but the tree is often used in Chinese culture and poetry as symbolizing something which grows, something which becomes stronger and stronger with nurture. So the first layer of interpretation being, behold that magnificent or outstanding tree becomes, here begins your journey to achieve your majestic and sovereign mind. Hou Huang Jia Su. Ju Lai Fu Si. Here is the blossoming orange tree, or here is the beginning of the blossoming of your sovereign mind. Shou Ming Bu Qian. Since you were given the mission not to move, but here, epistemologically speaking, it's very easy to understand that you receive the mission to be unwavering in your mind and your behavior. Okay, Shou Ming is the Chinese word for destiny or for mission, and it has a very strong connotation. Okay, when in the Christian culture, people are talking about the fact that we are made in the image of God, it has the connotation that we have the mission or the endeavor to become similar to God. Okay, to be inspired by the core essential of what God is: truth, goodness, and beauty. So those four Chinese characters are the equivalent of you are made in the image of God, and you are given the endeavor to go on that journey to embody in your life truth, goodness, and beauty. Shou Ming Bu Qian. You receive the mandate of destiny to be an unwavering being. 生难国系, ordinary, translated as in an ordinary manner, as you wouldn't live forever in that southern state, but on a symbolic level, you would live forever in this southern state. Let's not forget that the southern state is much more sunny than the northern state by comparison. Okay, so here you would live forever in the southern states mean that having received the mission to go on the endeavor of your epistemological growth, when it would be achieved, you will live forever within the sun of the absolute. Okay, you will, when you will be capable to embody truth, goodness, and beauty, you will be forever in that sun of the absolute. That is the true meaning of those four lines. 后皇家书居来福系，寿命不见，生难国系。I would say I would not do it with the 160 characters, Chinese characters, but I wanted to take a certain time to expand those 16 first characters because it's the core essential of the poem. Okay, as in most famous poems, well, it's in the classical mind. Okay, that when you speak or when you write or when you present something, the core essential is given at the start. So you know that the rest is only an elaboration about that core essential. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about the context. Okay, the bigger historical context. Once again, I remind that Chu Yuan was born in 339 BCE, and he died in 278 BCE. Okay, so the first Chinese empire was created in 221 BCE. So it's the generation just before the two generation just before the creation of the first Chinese empire. The Zhou royal house truly ruled China from 1046 BCE to 770 BCE. They ruled over a land of about 1.2, 1.3 million square kilometers during those almost 3 centuries. In 770 BCE, they were no more capable under the onslaught of some unhappy feudal lords and northwestern tribes. They lost the western capital city in 770 BCE. And from between 770 BCE to 256 BCE is the era called the Eastern Zhou dynasty, during which that royal house still exists, but they were not truly kings, but only control models and political arbiters. The 1.2 million square kilometers was shattered into about 100 principalities. Some of them were quite big, some of them were maybe just a city-state surrounded by its countryside. At the time of Qu Yuan, in the 3rd century BCE, those 100 and so principalities became just 7 major kingdoms in competition for creating the first empire. Because at this time, everyone knew that the situation of the 7 contending kingdoms would not last for very long. And it's only a question of 2 or 3 generations at the most that the empire would be created. A lot of philosophical schools and strategic schools were created at the time in order to make that idea of empire a reality. The fact that if I exclude the minor dynasties, I would say that China is the attempt for 10 times to create the not perfect, but the functional nation empire civilization. And now I want to introduce my idea of nation empire civilization, which is not what is understood by empire in the Anglosphere. Because empire in the Anglosphere is understood as the organization of a relentless plutocracy, seeing its citizens as sheep to be shorn or sheep to be skinned. Uh, that's not the idea of Tianxia. Okay, that's not the idea of nation empire civilization. Nation empire civilization is formed by a nation, meaning people having lived together for centuries and sharing a deep anthropological matrix. And civilization is that collective endeavor to go to truth, goodness, and beauty. And that collective endeavor is guaranteed by the middle term, empire, which in my understanding is the powerful and noble state trying to guarantee the living condition for that collective endeavor to go to truth, goodness, beauty, the third term of the expression nation, empire, civilization. And my contention, or my pretension is that China is one of the many empires, nation empire civilization, because China is not the only one, but China is one of the major nation empire civilization having its adventure begun 4,000 years ago. And the CPC, the Chinese Communist Party, or what I prefer to say, the CCP, and it's not my invention, but the invention of Professor Kishore Mahbubani, a international relations professor from Singapore. The CCP is rather the Chinese Civilization Party. Keeping on that 4 millennia long adventure of the Chinese nation empire civilization. And in the 3rd century BCE, we were at a nexus of the adventure of that nation empire civilization because many candidates, 7 candidates were on the line. I would say that among those 7 candidates, 3 were the most promising: the Chu Kingdom, the Qin Kingdom, and the Wei Kingdom during the 4th century BCE. But destiny and the decisions of epistemologically advanced man made the Qin Kingdom win the prize of empire, or to be precise, of nation empire civilization in 221 BCE. At that time, you have many possible results, but would happen, but having its final result in 221 BCE. I return to the poems. To make the poem better understood, I would like to remind the Platonic epistemological map, okay? Because my subject is about Chu Yuan. I have 3 subjects in my presentation this afternoon. Chu Yuan poem, metaphor for the soul of the aristocratic man, the Chinese nation empire civilization, but first and foremost, as in most of my presentation anyway, the epistemological growth. And I always go back to the Platonic map because I think it's the best map that I can present to Westerners. And once again, the Platonic map is directly from this chapter 7 of the Republic, the allegory of the cave, or the whole 10 chapters of the Republic, or also a very specific trilogy in his 40s and some dialogues. I think that Plato wrote about 40 dialogues. I did not count precisely. But among his 40 dialogues, you have outside of the Republic, a trilogy of dialogues, 3 dialogues, which focus more precisely on the epistemological development or the creation of the aristocratic man. And those 3 are probably many of you already know are the Theaetetus, written in 469 BCE, if I remember. Plato wrote the Republic when he was 52 years old. In 375 BCE, and he wrote the Theaetetus in 369 BCE when he was 58, and the next 2 he wrote them later on when he was in his 60s, the Sophist and the Statesman. Okay, so the Theaetetus, the Sophist, and the Statesman is the trilogy focusing on the creation of the aristocratic man, or on the development of chapter 7 of the Republic, if you want. And it's normal that he had written them after the Republic. It's the logical procedure. So I remind that either in the trilogy or in the chapter 7 of the Republic, Plato divided the epistemological growth in 6 steps or stages. I know that I already talk about that often, but since it's a major topic, please bear with me. I will repeat it again, okay? So I will first use English words for those stages, okay? So 1 would be vitality, 2 would be intellect, 3 would be psyche. The psyche is the inchoate soul, and that is the animal kingdom or the animal mind living in time. 4, 5, 6 is the divine mind being in timelessness. So 4 is the soul, corresponding to the timeless form of beauty. 5 is the cosmos, not the outer cosmos, but our inner cosmos, meaning corresponding to the timeless form of goodness. And 6 is the timeless, is the self, corresponding to the timeless form of truth. And 4, 5, 6 form the divine or the timeless dimension. And as I wrote in my summary for this presentation, the human fate is a tragic one, because we have the privilege to be the only animal species on Earth in which time and timelessness coexist. And if we are not, and if on an individual level or collective level, we cannot manage to make the timeless dimension, meaning the divine dimension of truth, goodness, and beauty, be at to be at the driver's seat, the consequence for us human being without truth, goodness, and beauty at the driver's seat is either madness if we are in a powerful family, or despair if we are not in a powerful family. So the endeavor or the invitation to the epistemological growth is not an option. Is not invitation is a nice word, because invitation, you can't refuse an invitation, of course. But I would say it's an invitation, but it's much more than an invitation. It's an obligation if you don't want to become mad or desperate. So Since no one wished to be mad or desperate, it's not an obligation, and it's not an invitation, it's an obligation, or maybe a nice word would be it's an endeavor to be achieved. Uh, I want to, before going back to Chu Yuan poem, I want to repeat again the Greek words from Plato. Vitality for him is the senses perception, okay? And the senses perception is eikasia or shadows in Greek. And that level corresponds politically to the democratic man, okay? The man motivated by hedonism, lex talionis, tribal affinities, and understanding precisely limited to senses perception. To intellect correspond to Akasya 2 for Plato, meaning the shadows level 2, because putting words and concept and images on things, on people, can give the false illusion that we understand the things or the people. 3, psyche is the inchoate soul, meaning the psyche is also called the heart, because in the psyche you have is someone having a very powerful intellect, and in that powerful intellect you sometimes have a drop or two from the soul, okay? And it's the domain of the fake democratic man, because the fake democratic man, he's not wholly in beauty, but uh, sometimes he's uplifted to beauty. So because that sometimes he's uplifted to beauty, he can mesmerize people very easily. Uh, for people having read the Lord of the Ring, um, uh, you have Menkor, for example, is a good example of fake democratic man, because he was born an angelic being, but he let his intellect having the control of his soul, if you want. Okay, so those people have some drops of beauty at the level of the soul. So that's why they can appear very powerful, because they are not only in the animal kingdom. They have something of the divine kingdom. That's why they manage to mesmerize people. And the number 4 is the level of the true democratic man, meaning the man have being wholly in the divine kingdom, being wholly guided by the timeless form of beauty. And the 5th level is the level of the aristocratic man, the man motivated by discovery, inventivity, creativity, and playful exploration. And the 6th stage is the stage of the philosophical man or philosophical king, or the philosopher king, uh, motivated by the creation of aristocratic man and true democratic man. And now I truly come back to the English translation of the next lines of Chu Yuan's poem, Ode to the Orange Tree. So deeply rooted, so nowhere else you could be driven. Okay, so we can understand epistemologically quite easily that line. So deeply rooted in truth, goodness, and beauty, so nowhere else could you be driven. You're constantly firm in your determination, of course, that's a natural consequence. You leaves green and flowers clean. So delightful is the glorious profusion, even though between layers of leaves there are thorns. The fruits are so beautiful and round, the green and yellow ones in fine contrast, such color looks like rosy cloud. You outer color distinct, you're purely white inside, meaning the purity of the divine kingdom. Okay, there's only one color, the color of pure white light of truth, goodness, and beauty. You are just a like a gentleman who can be entrusted with a big task. Okay, precisely. The axial epistemo-political triangle is something which is um, integrated. Okay, the epistemological growth is not only for fun. Well, it's for fun, of course, because it's the playful exploration attitude, but it has also the goal to come back to the cave. Because if once again you remember the allegory of the cave, once the gentleman went to the sun of the absolute, he doesn't just stay there. He would come back to the cave. So here is, you are just like a gentleman who can be entrusted with a big task. Okay, it's 2 yuan equivalent of Plato's invitation to the gentleman having seen the sun of the absolute to come back to the cave. You refused. So I repeat the last two lines. You outer color distinct. You're purely white inside. You are just like a gentleman who can be entrusted with a big task. Being natural and unrestrained, your beauty is refined. I admire you, orange tree in southern state. And once again, orange tree here is for the aristocratic man. So I admire you, you aristocratic man. In southern state, once again, a sunny state means the sun of the absolute. I admire you, aristocratic man, living with your heart centered in the sun of the absolute. You refuse to move away. You're independent. Such strong will is pleasing and pleasant. So deeply rooted to nowhere else you could be driven. You're no loss. Your mind is so broadly open. You're sober and remote from dirt. Never yield to vulgarity, even though you're free in action. Okay, you're no loss. Your mind is so broadly open. Let's not forget that timelessness can be defined as truth, goodness, and beauty. And time, precisely, is defined by unawareness, greed or lust, anger, jealousy, and arrogance. So you have no loss. Your mind is so broadly open. Once again, means that he is rooted in the Son of the Absolute. Because let's not forget that Christian classical theology would make the distinction between lust for knowledge and aspiration for knowledge. Okay, when you aspire for knowledge is to understand with a as a playful exploration attitude and the idea of sharing. And when you lust for knowledge, which is more in the time and not in timelessness, you wouldn't want that knowledge in order to be powerful and to lord upon other people. So that is a very fundamental distinction. And once again, that is the difference, the opposition between the aristocratic man, soul, symbolized here in Chu Yuan poem by the orange tree, and the plutocratic man, intellect. And I remind everyone that intellect is the second stage of the epistemological growth according to Plato's map and Confucius' map too, but he used other words. So deeply rooted to nowhere else you could be driven. You have no loss. Your mind is so broadly open. You're sober and remote from dirt, never yield to vulgarity, even though you're free in action. You're so prudent, keeping your heart clean. You committed no mistakes, no sin. Your unselfish values can be matched with the earth and heaven. And here can be matched with the earth and heaven is when the two dimensions are reconciled, okay? Because there's nothing wrong with the animals. That's why I chose the nice words for the three stages of the animal kingdom. Okay, vitality. There's nothing wrong with vitality. Intellect. There's nothing wrong with intellect. Is the biological machine for concepts and images, and psyche. So the tragedy is not the tragedy does not stem from vitality, intellect, and psyche. The tragedy stems from the fact that vitality, intellect, and psyche is not driven by truth, goodness, and beauty. So when the lie says your unselfish values can be matched with the earth and heaven, it means the specific situation when the animal is voluntarily surrendering to truth, goodness, and beauty. Okay, because you cannot force it. It can only be the natural result of the epistemological journey and of study and understanding and discussions and living one's own life, of course. And when there is the surrender of the animal to truth, goodness, and beauty, that is that your unselfish values can be matched with the earth and heaven, earth, the animal, and heaven, the divine dimension, the two in harmony with the divine dimension in the driver's seat. So then you will have a normal human life and not a life of madness or despair. Of course, madness and despair can be at different levels. Okay, you don't necessarily have the extreme hubris of the plutocrats or the despair of someone having a serious mental condition, but it's various degrees of madness and despair if the divine dimension of truth, goodness, and beauty is not in the driver's seat. So I keep on with the poem. I wish in the cold spell, when all flowers withered, be your firm and lifelong friend. You are kind-hearted and disciplined with clear veins. Your body is so straight. So of course, that's the classical idea from the West, from the East, from the South, from the North, that when your mind is in harmony, your body will follow. Okay, because the mind is the master. Or to be precise, truth, goodness, and beauty are the master as a unity, influencing the different layers of the mind. And when the mind is influenced by truth, goodness, and beauty, the body simply follows spontaneously. So you're kind-hearted and disciplined with clear veins. Your body is so straight. Though you're still young, you can be a teacher. I look upon. Your behavior is as good as that of Po Yi. Po Yi was a philosopher and a statement of 3,000 years ago. An example for me to follow for long. So I want to read it once again, continuously without interruption and without commands. Ode to the orange tree. Orange tree nurtured by nature, born to be adaptable to the soil and water here. Since you were given the mission not to move, you will live forever in the southern state. So deeply rooted to nowhere else could be driven. You're constantly firm in your determination. Your leaves green and flowers clean. So delightful is the glorious profusion. Even though between layers of leaves there are thorns, the fruits are so beautiful and round, the green and yellow ones in firm contrast. Such color looks like rosy cloud. You outer color distinct, you purely white inside. You are just like a gentleman who can be entrusted with a big task. being natural and unrestrained. Your beauty is refined. I admire you, orange tree in southern state. You made up your mind so early. You are unique. You refuse to move away. You're independent. Such strong will is pleasing and pleasant. So deeply rooted to nowhere else you could be driven. You have no lust. Your mind is so broadly open. You're sober and remote from dirt. Never yield to vulgarity, even though you're free in action. You're so prudent, keeping your heart clean. You committed no mistakes, no sin. Your unselfish values can be matched with the earth and heaven. I wish in the cold spell when all flowers withered, be your firm and lifelong friend. You're kind hearted and disciplined, with clear veins. Your body is so straight. Though you're still young, you can be a teacher I look up to. Your behavior is good as that of Paul Yi, an example for me to follow for long. So that's the short but very dense poem by Chu Yuan, a philosopher, a poet, a statesman of the 3rd century BCE, having lived in the southern Chu kingdom during a very momentous, pivotal moment of the Chinese civilization or the Chinese nation empire civilization. I would say that I think that I don't have to convince any one of you that we are living a very momentous moment nowadays, not only in China, but on the whole planet, because we are also living a moment of contention for empire. But do we want that empire to be the empire of a relentless plutocracy skinning people or the nation empire civilization? Many nations empire civilization, because as I said that 15 minutes ago, China is not the only empire civilization on earth. And at the difference of the contention or the race or the competition 23 centuries ago, there is no need for only one winner. I think there can be many winners. There can be many nations, empire, civilization thriving on earth, having a healthy competition, because competition will keep on. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's the human nature, but healthy competition, meaning a competition to see what powerful state will bring their people to the ultimate endeavor, meaning civilization. Okay, the ultimate and collective and individual endeavor to truth, goodness, and beauty. And that competition is a competition that is much more interesting than the competition having happened 23 centuries ago in China, because that competition one winner. And in this new competition, I think it's possible to have many winners and of different powers, but that's okay. There's nothing wrong. There are big people, small people, average people. So they are big nations, small nation, average nations. Okay, they can all be winners at their own levels. And I want to keep on this time with a. I know that my title is the contrast between the aristocratic man soul and the plutocratic man intellect. I will not talk a lot about the plutocratic man intellect because he's less interesting. But I would make two aristocratic man separated by 23 centuries dialogue through me in the timeless dimension. Okay, one of those two aristocratic man is of course Chu Yuan that I talk a little bit in the last 30 minutes. And the other one, I would introduce him to you now. And he's Guo Moruo. Okay, I won't spell his name. His family name is Guo. Guo, okay? But G in the Pinyin transliteration system is pronounced like a K in English, okay? So it's Guo. Imagine Kuo, Guo, that is his family name. Moruo is his given name, Moruo. And that Quan Moruo was born at the end of the 19th century. I think it was in 1894, and he died in the 1990s. But I won't give you the exact stuff because I want to read a short biography of Quan Moruo. He was born in 1892, to be exact. And he died at the end of the 20th century. Quan Moruo, born in 1892, is a Chinese poet, historian, political activist, and lighter in the international peace movement. In his youth, he studied in Japan, and on his return in 1921, began his literary career and founded the well-known literary group, the Creation Society, okay, a very apt name for an aristocratic man, the Creation Society. The inspiring songs in his two collections of poems, The Goddess and the Starry Sky, in Starry Sky, I'm sorry, and his play Three Women in Revolt aroused many young people to take part in the revolutionary struggle. During the Northern Expeditionary War of 1926, 1927, sorry, Quan Moruo, deputy director of the political department of the National Revolutionary Army. When in 1927, Chiang Kai-shek betrayals of the revolution became apparent, he openly exposed Chiang crimes in the press. He participated in the Nanchang uprising of August 1927, and after its failure fled to Japan, where he made a study of ancient Chinese history. His studies in ancient Chinese society is the first historical study by a Chinese scholar from a Marxist stand. He also made a great contribution to the study of ancient Chinese by his work on oracle bowls and bronze inscriptions. Okay, so the more archaic forms of Chinese writings. After the outbreak of the War of Resistance to Japanese aggression in 1937, because I think that all of you know that the Chinese name for World War II is the War of Resistance against Fascism and the Japanese aggression. So after the outbreak of the War of Resistance to Japanese aggression in 1937, he returned home to join in the war effort. During the war, he worked persistently by various means in the Kuomintang control area and became an outstanding standard bearer of progressive artists and writers there. His historical play, Chu Yuan, precisely, he wrote on Chu Yuan, written in 1942, gave forceful expression to the wrath of the people in the Kuomintang controlled territory at that time. The play was an important, the production of the play was an important political event. Quan Moruo many literary and political writings and the stirring speeches he made at various meetings during and after the war won him the love of the people and the hate of the Kuomintang reactionaries. Finally, in 1947, he was forced to take refuge in Hong Kong, where he continued to write significant articles on the study of ancient Chinese society and the history of political thought. These essays were later published in two volumes, 10 Critiques and The Bronze Age. In 1949, at the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, he was elected member of the Central People's Government Council and vice chairman of the National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. He was also appointed vice premier, chairman of the Committee of the Control and Educational Affairs of the government, and president of Academia Sinica. In 1950, when the Chinese People's Committee for World Peace was set up, he was elected chairman. He participated in the World Peace Congresses of in 1949 and 1950 and became a well-known fighter in the international peace movement. At the second Congress, he was elected as member of the World Peace Council and has since taken an active part in all the work of the World Peace Council. In 1952, he was honored with an award at the International Stalin Prize of the International Stalin Prize for the promotion of peace among nations. So I wanted to give that short biography so that you know who was Guo Moruo. And I want to read the beginning of the play by Guo Moruo on Yuan precisely. As I said, those two aristocratic men were separated by 23 centuries in space-time, but they are still present and they are present together in the timeless dimension. So I want to, and the plutocratic man in that play, because I said that I would not talk too much about the plutocratic man, and in the part that I would read, I think that the plutocratic man of the play will not appear. But in the play, the archetypical plutocratic man is embodied by Prince Zilan, Z-I-L-A-N, okay? And Prince Zilan is a true historical character as Qu Yuan, of course. Prince Zilan was a younger son of King Huai of Chu, and King Huai of Chu ruled from 324, 325 BCE to 299 BCE. So he was the cousin and contemporary of Qu Yuan. And that Prince Zilan is the typical plutocratic man fighting for the interest, wealth, and power of his landowner class, of course. I describe the scene. An orange grove one morning in late spring. Several oranges from the previous year remain on the branches. Behind the orchard stands a fence with a door in the right center and fields stretching outside. On the left, there's another door leading to the inner chambers. And the right-hand side of the orchard stands a raised pavilion with steps leading to it from the left, on which are placed two pots of orchids, one on each side. So the orchids are symbols because in Chinese culture, orchids symbolize a purity of heart and a developed mind. And let's not forget that it's very difficult to cultivate orchids, okay? So it's also a symbol of the not easy epistemological growth. So you have to be very unwavering in your intention to go on that endeavor of epistemological growth. So the very strong symbol of orchids. At the foot of the steps lies a bamboo broom. In addition to the orange trees in the orchard, you have some people. The bamboo too is a symbol, okay? Because the bamboo is a vegetal that would bend but not break, okay? So in Chinese culture, the bamboo also is a symbol for the gentleman capable to retreat, but not losing his nature by retreating if needed. So here, I would like to read another English translation by Gladys and Xian Yang. Gladys and Xian Yang are wife and husband. They live in the 20th century, and they're famous for having translated a lot of Chinese literature into English. And I will read the English translation of the poem by the two spouses. So you have to imagine Chu Yuan reading the poem. Here the orange tree is found, shedding beauty all around, living in the southern grove. From its late, it will not move, for at its root lie fast and deep, so its purpose it will keep. With green leaves and blossoms white, it brings beauty and delight. Yet foliage and sharp thorns abound. The fruit is so ripe and brown. Golden clusters, cluster green, glimmer with a lovely sheen, while all within is pure and clear like heart of a philosopher. Grace and splendor here are one, beauty all and blemish none. So I will read some transitional lines, and you would have a dialogue between Chu Yuan and one of his students, Song Yu. And Song Yu also is a historical character, of course. Song is written Song, his family name, and Yu, his given name. So having read to this point, he pauses and puts the writing on his knees, then takes up the orange and folds it with his hand, closing his eyes in reflection. Then he opens his eyes again and casually split the orange into two, not intending to eat it, but simply to amuse himself. At this point, Sun Yu enters from the outer door, carrying a small brown dog. He is about 20, wearing a small jacket and with two tufts of hair on his head. So Song Yu, having seen Chu Yuan, sir, you have come out? Oh, I was Chu Yuan. I was looking for you. Where have you been? Song Yu. After I had swept the garden, I took A Chin, the name of the dog, for a run outside. Chu Yuan. That's very good. It is a very good thing for you young people to form the habit of rising early and to take exercise from time to time. Song Yu, sir, is this you are in this you are praising the orange, referring to the poem. Chu Yuan, yes, that is so in the first part of the poem, but not in the second part. Please read it. Okay, so Song Yu will read the second part. Your youthful and impetuous heart sets you from the common man apart. And when contented, I to see your resolute integrity, deep rooted thus you stand unshaken, impartial, but no fancies taken. Steadfast, you choose your course alone, following no fashion but your own. Over you, you hold firm sway, nor suffer it to go astray. Standing erect, heaven and earth are with you. Then let no thing divide us twain. Your friend I ever would remain. Be noble still without excess and stern, but yet with gentleness. Though young in years and in complexion, yet be my master in perfection. Po ye as your standard take, his virtues as your model make. Sir, Song Yu speaking, sir, did you really write this for me? Chu Yuan, yes, I wrote it for you. Song Yu, how can I be worthy of such praise? And here it's very interesting because it shows that uh, there's a communion between Chu Yuan and Guo Moruo 23 centuries later. I hope you can. Look at the orange trees. What an excellent lesson they teach. They are not in the least proud, nor timid, nor careless, nor stooping. Yes, they are like the sun, but they are not afraid of the frost and the snow. Their leaves are as brilliant as emerald. The hotter the sun, the better pleased they are. So once again, the image of the Son of the Absolute. The more truth, beauty, and goodness enter into us, the better we are. Yes, they like the sun, but they are not afraid of the frost and snow. Their leaves are as brilliant as emerald. The hotter the sun, the better pleased they are. But however bitter the frost and snow, they show no anxiety. At the proper season, they blossom, and their flowers are exquisitely fragrant and snow white. At the proper season, they bear fruit, and their fruit is perfectly round and full of color. From green, they turn to yellow, from yellow to red, and inside, how transparent they are, how pure and clear. He shows the inside of the split orange. They blossoms and bear fruit, and anybody can eat them. So that is a very strong image too. Anybody can eat them. That's an invitation to everyone to go on the epistemological growth. They blossoms and bear fruit, and anybody can eat them. And their fruit is sweet and delectable. When people eat them, they do not complain. And when nobody eats them, they feel no resentment. Okay, once again, it's an invitation. You cannot force anyone to go on the path of truth and goodness and beauty. For they are entirely magnanimous and free from selfishness. And if you were to say that they are willing to please anybody without showing any spirit of their own, you would be wrong. They are not like that. Look at the trees. Are they not full of thorns? They will not allow you to interfere with them as you please. They grow in the south here. Okay. And once again, the south is the symbol of the Son of the Absolute. They grow in the south here, and they love the south. Thus, it is no easy matter to move them because they are unwavering, rooted into the Son of the Absolute, because they are unwavering. What an independent and unyielding spirit this shows. Don't you think it sets a good example for us? Yes, sir, but after your explanation, I feel I have received a very good lesson. Don't you mean that if even a tree can be like this, surely we human beings can be the same? Indeed, we can. And Chu Yuan answered, yes, you have grasped my meaning. You are an intelligent lad. For although you are still young, you have chosen the right study and you work hard. So that although scatterbrained people try to tempt you to join them in their mischiefs, you are rarely willing to go. This makes me very pleased. So I hope you will be able to be like this orange tree, independent, impartial, stern, and unyielding. You must be humble, free from vain desires, unyielding, and unaffected by popular tendencies. You must show more determination and cherish a pure, upright, and unselfish heart. Then you can avoid great faults and take a stand as a true man between heaven and earth. If you attain this, I would like to remain your friend forever, regardless of our difference in age. If you can attain this, even though you are still young, you can be the teacher of ordinary people. However, you must not be over proud, but stern with gentleness. When you reach the crossroads of your life, you must not stoop at all, nor yield to temptation. You must imitate that great man of old, Po Yi, who starved himself to death on the Shaoyang mountain. For better starve to death rather than lose your integrity. Do you understand me? Song Yu answers, I understand very well. My wish is to imitate you, sir, with all my heart and mind. I want to learn your wisdom and knowledge, and I want to learn your attitude towards life. Only your character is so lofty that I shall never be able to be like you. Chu Yuan answered, you must not think too highly of me, nor too poorly of yourself. This is the most important. I am actually a very ordinary person, but I think all people at birth are equally ordinary. If one wants to be exceptional, that must depend upon one's own efforts. We ought to take higher models. And the best thing is to take as our model a successful figure in history. Then, if we do our utmost to follow in his steps, or even determined to surpass him, I believe that as a result of this continuous effort, we can certainly succeed. There is a scholar in the north called Yuan, a favorite disciple of Confucius, who recently said something which I consider quite significant. He said, what was Shun? Shun was a legendary emperor um, 35 centuries ago, a model of virtue. What was Shun? Just a man. What am I? Also, not 35 centuries ago, rather uh, 43 centuries ago. My apologies. What am I? Also a man, one who sets his mind on it can achieve it. This is indeed an excellent lesson. We know that King Shun was a remarkable person, but what was he? Was he not a man? And what am I? Am I not a man? If he could achieve this much, why can't we? It is possible. It is possible. Everything depends upon man's action. Even water can wear out rocks. Even a rope can wear out wood. Everything depends on one's own effort, upon one's own unceasing behavior. So I stop here the reading of the play, and I want to make a a comment on the major epistemological manual of the Confucian school, or the Rujia, the school of the scholar that the Westerner call Confucianism. Uh, I want to remind that the core classics of the Rujia, or the school of the scholars, are the book of documents, the book of poetry, the Yi Ching, the book of chain, the Chun Chu, which is a philosophical historical interpretation of the chronicle, the historical chronicle of the Lu Principality, and the three books on the rituals. But that is more what I would call the control aspect of the classics. Okay, the epistemological dimension is on the four books. Okay, the so-called four books. And those four books are the Analects, the selected sayings by Confucius, the Mencius, and the Mencius was a philosopher of the Confucian school who was born in 372 BCE and he died in 289 BCE. And once again, I remind that Confucius was born in 551 BCE and he died in 479 BCE. And for Plato, a reminder too, Plato was born in 427 BCE and he died in 347 BCE. So those people live around the same times. And so the four books, the Analects, the Mencius, the Ta Sui, the Great Learning, and the Chong Yong, the Doctrine of the Mean. Okay, and those four books are about epistemology. Okay, and the other five books, the books of poetry, of documents, the three on rituals, the Chun Chu, the historical philosophical interpretation of the Lu Principality, and uh, the Yi Ching. So the cultural historical aspect, meaning the cultural legacy of the Zhou royal house, the five classic Wu Jing, and the Sushu, the four books, uh, are as important, if not more important, because that is truly more universal. Okay, the four classic, which is the cultural legacy of the Zhou royal house, is important for the Chinese people, of course, because that's the root of their culture, of their nation, empire, civilization. Okay, but it's not as important for the rest of the world. It's not as universal as the four books. Okay, the four books is truly universal because it's about epistemology. It has been expressed with the Chinese lexicon, of course. But since it's about epistemology, the four books is universal because it can be used for anyone on earth. And because they're important, I repeat their name, the Analects, the Mencius, the Ta Sui, the Great Learning, and the Chongyong, the doctrine of the mean. And I want to talk a little bit about the Tashui and the great learning because the Tashui is truly the core epistemological manual, which is the more technical, in, in quotation mark, equivalent of the poem Ode to the Orange Tree by Chu Yuan. Okay, in the um, Tashui, the great learning, and it has been written by a direct disciple of Confucius called Master Zeng. Zeng is written Zeng, that's his family name, and his given name is Sheng, Sheng. So Zeng Zi, Zi meaning master, so Master Zeng. He was born in 505 BCE and he died in 435 BCE. So when Confucius died in 479 BCE, he was a young man of 26 years old, but he was a very brilliant and deep young man. And so it's not a surprise that he wrote the core epistemological manual of the Confucian school. So I want to take 5 minutes to talk about the core of that epistemological manual. The core is called the three guidelines and the 8 stages. Okay, let's start with the three guidelines because those are the three principles. The first guideline is you have to make your inner pearl, your inner nature bright. That's the first guideline. The second guideline is you have to renew people. And I will explain I will explain it now. You have to renew people in the sense that if you remember, I said that time can be defined as unawareness, anger, greed or lust, jealousy, and arrogance. And those emotions, most of the time, if not always, are nurtured because of what happened to us in the past because of certain unfortunate interactions. Okay. And if we are not on the epistemological path, we will nurture those negative stuff and we will not be renewed in our life because of those uh, persisting resentments, if you want, okay, to say things in the nutshells. So the gentleman, one of his mission, one of his endeavor is to give the tools to people so that to renew them first, and second, that by themselves in an autonomous manner afterwards, they would be capable to renew themselves by themselves because they would have advanced in their epistemological journey, that they would have become themselves aristocratic man, autonomous with a sovereign mind. So to make your inner quality bright, to renew people, and to accomplish the task of a gentleman. That's the guidelines or the three principles of the Tashui, the great learning. Once again, the epistemology manual of the Confucian school that the Chinese call the Rujia, the school of the scholars. And the 8 stages are very interesting. And I wouldn't start by the end, okay? Because stages 1 to 8, I would start by 5, 6, 7, 8. Because stage of 5 is not really a stage, okay? Stage 5 is a label put to summarize stages 1 to 4, okay? In stage 5, it's written cultivate yourself, okay? But cultivate yourself, it doesn't mean anything, but it means something when I want to explain what are 1, 2, 3, and 4, okay? So cultivate yourself is a label for 1, 2, 3, and 4. And when you have the mental power, when you will have the sovereign mind to do that, you will go back to the cave if you use a Plato lexicon, okay? And 6, 7, 8 is your action when you go back into the cave, meaning 6 is to put order in your family. 7 is to assist in the governance of the state, and 8 is to bring peace to the world. Interestingly, in the Chongyong, the order of the one of the 4 books on epistemology, when the Chongyong, written by Confucius' grandson Zisi, Z-I-S-I, and Zisi was born in 482 BCE, and he died in 402 or 403 BCE. So that Chongyong would only speak about the result, meaning uh, cultivate yourself, put order in your family, assist in the governance of the state, and bring peace to the world. And now I come back to the core essential 1 to 4. Okay, what is to cultivate yourself? Because we're speaking of the 8 stages, and I talk about the stages 6, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Now I will speak about stages 1, 2, 3, 4. Stage 1 is to align your affairs, meaning that before you do anything seriously on the epistemological level, you have to be at least a normal citizen, okay? That you're not a thief, that you're not a tricksters, that you're not a con man, that you have at least that minimum, okay? Align your affairs or put orders in your affairs. That's 1. 2 is 格物致知 in Chinese, and 格物致知 is to extend your knowledge by exploring reality and by going deeper in your understanding. Okay, so it means you have to read, you have to discuss with people, you have to live your life, but with as much awareness as possible. 格物致知, okay, extend your knowledge, and knowledge here has to be understood at episteme in the sense of Plato. Okay, true knowledge, hence epistemological growth. Okay, 格物致知, and episteme in Chinese is 知, okay, knowledge or wisdom or true knowledge. So extend your true knowledge, extend your wisdom, extend your epistemological level by exploring reality by different means, discussing, reading, living your life, experimenting, etc. And three is very, very important, even if it's said with words which appear ordinary. Okay. 3 is make your intention sincere. Okay, because it's not enough to extend your knowledge, to explore, and etc. You have to be unwavering. Is your intention truly sincere? Are you motivated by the lust for knowledge, or you are motivated truly by the exploration of knowledge? Okay, I think that Schiller, in his speech on universal history, was making the distinction between the true gentleman and the gentleman, not the gentleman, but the student for bread or the student for knowledge. Okay, so that's the distinction here. Okay, make your intention sincere. Better to be a true self-aware plutocrat than a hypocrite gentleman. Okay, well, a hypocrite gentleman is no gentleman at all, of course. So better to be a true self-aware plutocrat in that sense. And once that your intention is truly sincere, uh, number 4 is balance your mind. Okay, balance your mind is that precisely when I said that if your intention is sincere, your mind will automatically be balanced. I will explain why. I said maybe an hour ago that we human beings have received a tragic fate, because if we don't manage to put truth and goodness and beauty at the center or at the driver's seat, the 2 only possible consequences are either despair or madness. That is an unbalanced mind, okay, to be mad or to be desperate. So if you explore reality with a sincere heart, and if you are truly sincere and not having knowledge for lust of power, but rather for true exploration and yearning for true knowledge and helping people, truth, goodness, and beauty is at the center of your life and of your mind. So automatically, your mind is balanced. Okay, meaning the balanced mind is not mad or desperate. The balanced mind is the mind having truth, goodness, and beauty at its center. And I wouldn't finish my presentation in the next 10 minutes because I want, and you might find a little bit strange that I will want to speak about that, but I think that you will not have uh, too much difficulty to understand why I want to talk about that. And it will take about 15 minutes. I said at the maybe 40 minutes ago that we are also at the crisis, a political crisis of our home world nowadays. But what is interesting is that the race doesn't have to finish with one winner, but with many winners, many nations, empire, civilization. And I want to finish my presentation by a comparison of Rome and China, okay? Because uh, I think that some of you know that Cicero, who was born, I think, somewhere in 102 BCE, and he died in 43 BCE, I think, or if it's not exact, it's around those years. Was probably the last Roman Republican, and he failed in his endeavor to save the Roman Republic. And I would say that the Roman Empire is probably the archetype of the Anglo-American empire that we have nowadays, going through the Dutch Empire, the Venetian Empire, the British Empire, and so on. But they own the same base on the same model through time. Okay, and but the Chinese Empire is a nation empire civilization, but had also some elements of what I call uh, the skinning of the sheep empire too. So I would like to make a historical comparison between the two before going to the question and answer period, because once again, the main subject of this presentation is about epistemological growth, as it would all my presentation anyway, but it's also about the practical historical application of that epistemological growth. Okay, so without further ado, China and Rome, how do they compare? Let's start with the differences and we will finish with the commonalities. Okay, first difference is geopolitical precisely. China's heartland was far larger and more cohesive geographically and culturally than Rome's. Rome's had as its heartland central Italy, and even after conquering Italy, it had just that single peninsula bounded by the Alps Mountains and the Mediterranean Sea. In the time of Augustus, meaning around 27 BCE, to 30 AD in Rome and the Han Dynasty in China, the Roman and the Chinese empires each held about 60 million people. But in Rome, only a few of these millions were in Italy. In China, virtually all were in inner China, 90% of them in the North China plain. The difference in terms of ideology, although Confucian China spoke of a mythological golden age of equality among people in harmony with each other and with nature, realistically, the Confucians believed that the best possible government was a well-ordered empire. Imperial Rome knew of its actual historical republican past and always looked back to it as a golden age. Roman imperial expansion and stratification were often regarded as violations of the earlier republican ideals. Longevity and persistence. Rome's empire rose, fell, and was gone, although it lived on as a concept. China's empire has lasted for the last 2,000 years. Dynasties have come and gone, and sometimes the empire has broken into fragments. But finally, the empire endured as a single political entity. Today, although without an emperor, China geopolitical unity continues. And I would say that the Red Dynasty now is the 10th great Chinese dynasty. But I would say that here, the there's maybe something unfair to the Roman Empire, because I would say that the Roman Empire persists in under two forms. The Roman Empire persists as the Venetian, Dutch, British Empire in the West, and as the more nation empire civilization as the third Rome in Russia. Okay, so in my mind, Rome is split between the West, meaning more the exploitative plutocracy in the West that I call the KFC Azael. And I'm sorry for those people who heard that many times, but I want to repeat that the KFC Azael is the Western Roman Empire nowadays, meaning the aristocratic feudal conglomerate of the Anglo-Sino-American establishment. And for me, the Eastern Roman Empire is more Russia nowadays. So I think that the Roman Empire is not dead. The Chinese Empire is not dead, and the Communist Party of China, or the Chinese Civilization Party, is the 10th dynasty for me. And for me, in the West, the Roman Empire is not dead, but its Western part is the plutocratic dimension. And its Eastern part, with Moscow as the third Rome, is more the nation empire civilization dimension. Okay, so I keep on with my reading. Policy and powers of assimilation. Yes, I would go back to KFC later on, Harinder. It's my favorite subject, so don't worry. Politics and powers of assimilation. As China moved both north and south, it assimilated a great number of the peoples it invaded and conquered. Non-ethnic Chinese were absorbed culturally and biologically. Many of the 95% of today's Chinese population who are called Han are descended from ancestors who were not. The empire was held together by Confucian and Buddhist ideology, supported by the power of the emperor and his armies. Rome's empire was held together by law and backed by military power. Selected non-Romans could gain citizenship under law, but ethnically and culturally, the conquered peoples remained order. Intermarriage with non-citizens was usually forbidden. Rome maintained the cultural distinctions far more than did China. Language policy. The Chinese language unified the Chinese empire across space and through time to today, far more than Latin did the Roman Empire. Chinese was never subordinated to another language and culture, and as Latin was to Greek for many years and in many regions. Nor did Chinese compete with regional languages as Latin ultimately did. Indeed, Chinese helped to bring even neighboring countries, Vietnam, Korea, and Japan, together into a single general cultural unit, the Sinosphere, or the Chinese world. Latin was gradually supplanted as a spoken tongue by its successor Romance languages, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Catalan, and Romanian. Ideology and cultural cohesions. China's Confucian bureaucracy provided a core cultural identity throughout the empire and beyond. Even the alternative political cultural philosophies of China, such as Taoism, legalisms, and later Buddhism, usually, but not always, serve to broaden and augment the attraction of Confucianism. Rome's principal philosophies of paganism, Stoicism, and later Christianity did not significantly buttress and augment its imperial rule, and the latter, Christianity and Stoicism, may even have diminished popular loyalty to the empire. Influence on neighbors. The Roman Empire influenced the lands it conquered, but had less influence on those outside its boundaries. China exercised lasting hegemonic influence even on neighbors it did not conquer, such as Japan, or conquer only briefly, such as Korea. A considerable part of this legacy was religious and cultural, as well as political, economic, and administrative. And those are the differences. But now we come to what I consider more interesting, meaning the similarities between Rome and China. Relations with barbarians. Both empires faced nomadic groups from Central Asia who threatened and penetrated their boundaries. Indeed, the Huns who invaded Europe and the Xiongnu, which is simply the Chinese name for the Huns, who invaded China, may have belonged to the same ethnic group. Both empires settled the barbarians near their borders and enlisted them in the imperial armies. In both cases, the barbarians came to hold great powers. Ultimately, however, they dismembered the Roman Empire while they were absorbed by the Chinese. But I have to mention too that the Mongol ruled the Chinese for almost a century in the 13 and first half of the 14th century. Religious policies, both empires incubated foreign relations, both empires incubated foreign religions, especially in times of imperial disorder. But in Rome, Christianity did not save the empire, and by challenging the significance of earthly power, it may even have contributed to the empire's weakness and fall. In China, Buddhism was absorbed into Confucianism and Taoism and helped to sustain the national culture in time of political trouble. The role of the emperor. Both empires ascribed divine attributes to the emperor, and both frequently had difficulty in establishing rules for imperial succession. The Romans often attempted to choose their best general, while the Chinese selected a man who could control the imperial family, his own family, and the court. Neither empire believed that a single imperial family should rule forever. And indeed, both empires had many imperial dynasties. Gender relationships. Both empires subordinated women to men at all stages of life, and both drew analogies between hierarchies and loyalties in a well-run family and those in a well-run empire. So if you have been trained correctly in your family, normally you should be a good citizen for the empire. So it was the same ideology in both. Both empires used marriages as means for confirming political alliances with foreign powers. Both periodically found that excessive concern with sexual relationships was distracting energy away from the demands of sustaining the empire and instituted strict codes of sexual morality. In China, far more than in Rome, women of the imperial family play an important role in politics behind the scenes, particularly in terms of determining succession. Or one woman, the Empress Wu, ruling from 690 AD to 705 AD, took the throne for herself. Not in the sense that she was the wife or the mother of an emperor, but she created her own dynasty. The significance of imperial armies. In both empires, the army was crucial in creating and sustaining the political structure in the face of domestic and foreign enemies. The Roman Empire, as established and ruled by generals, as were the Qin, Han, Sui, and Tang dynasty in China, the empires were periodically threatened and usurped by rebel generals asserting their own authority. The cost of the armies, especially on distant, unprofitable expeditions, often bankrupted the government and encouraged its subjects to evade taxes and military service and even to rise in revolt. The deployment of armies of colonization. Both empires used colonies of soldier colonizer to garrison and develop remote areas while simultaneously providing compensation and retirement benefits for the troops. Overextension. Both empires suffer their greatest challenges in confronting simultaneously the strains of overextension and the subsequent internal revolts that trigger by the cost. In Rome, these dual problems, along with the barbarians' invasion, finally precipitated the end of the empire in the West. In China, even if I don't agree too much, because I think in the West, the Roman Empire still exists under the form of the KFC ASEAN in the West, and Moscow, the third Rome in the East. In China, they led to the loss of the mandate of heaven and the downfall of dynasties. The external battles against Qin, Jurchen border tribes, for example, combined with the revolt of the Yellow Turbans, brought down the later Han. The loss of the distant battle on the Talas River in 751 AD, combined with the internal revolt of An Lushan in 755, sapped Tang power. The Tang dynasty ruled from 618 AD to 907 AD. Public works project. Throughout their empire, the Romans built roads, aqueducts, public monumental structure, administrative, military towns, and the great capital cities of Rome and Constantinople. The Chinese built the Great Wall, the Great Canal, system of transportation by road and water, public monumental structures, administrative military towns throughout the empire, and several successive capitals, especially Chang'an and Luoyang. The concentration of wealth. In both empires, the benefits of imperial wealth tended to flow toward the center, to the elites in the capital cities. The capitals grew to unprecedented size. Both Chang'an and Rome housed more than 1 million people. Policies for and against individual mobility. In order to maintain power and stability in the face of demands for change, both empires periodically forced their peasantry to the soil and demanded that the sons of soldiers follow their fathers' occupations. Both found these policies difficult to enforce. Both offer some individual mobility through service in their armies. In addition, the Chinese examination system provided for advancement within the imperial bureaucracy. Revolts. Both empires experienced frequent revolts against the emperor and his policies. In Rome, which housed a much larger slave population, many of the revolts were led by slaves. In China, they were more typically initiated by peasants. Rome attempted to forestall mass revolts in the capital and other large cities through the provision of the so-called bread and circuses. And last similarity, peasant flight. In both empires, during times of upheaval, peasants sought to evade taxes and conscription by finding refuge as tenants on large landed estates. In times when imperial government was weak, the largest of these estates challenged the power of the central government. So it is the end of my presentation, and let's go to the Q&A session.
Wow, Quan, that was a very multifaceted presentation. That was amazing that you could balance so many different elements in a tapestry. That was fantastic. And I think what I'm going to probably do is just even have your concluding section on the comparative analysis of the Roman and Chinese systems as a standalone video as well. I think that's going to have it's going to be very popular. So far, what I know Quan really enjoys a less formal approach to the dialogue process. So if anybody has a thought or a question, now would be a great time to share it with the group and with Quan. So let's open it up. And you could put your name in the chat box if you want to do the formal approach or do one of those little digital hands. That's okay too. Oh, I see Harinder's mouth moving, but I don't hear his voice because everybody is on mute. That's a point I should have reemphasized. So that means, Harinder, you have to take yourself off of mute, bottom left-hand side of it. There you are.
So I'm trying, but it's not.
You got it. You got it.
I got it. You can hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so two questions, Quan. One is, I read in one of the history books, a Western history book that I can't recall the name of, that around the 14th or 15th century, the Chinese emperor built a navy, but then after a period of time, he did not, he stopped it. And one of the questions that was posed by that historian was whether European imperialism could have come to Asia if the Chinese had maintained that navy. So there is that question. And the second question I have is, in view of all you've said about the animal and the higher natures, how were the British and then later Americans able to impose opium on so many million Chinese? Just something along that lines, because that is what I understand devastated China, which was the biggest economy in the world for 18 centuries from what I'm reading. But the opium invasion, the opium war, I call them the opium war crimes, are what devastated China. So just any thoughts you have on that?
Yes, thank you, Harinder, for your two questions, because those two questions are probably the most, among, let's say, the most important 10 questions on Chinese civilizations. So about the trips of Zheng He, okay, because that was the name of the admiral, Zheng, Z-H-E-N-G, his family name, and He, H-E, his given name. He was a man of the early 15th century, since his trips to the Indian Oceans, okay, to Sri Lanka, to India, to what we call now the Middle East, and to Africa, and to Southeast Asia too, were performed between 14 and 3 or 5, the first travel, and 1433, the last one. So it's about the gap of a generation, about 30 years. Okay, why did the Emperor Xuanze did not keep on? Because the travels have been initiated by the Emperor Yongle, Y-O-N-G-L-E, who roamed between 1402 and 1425-26. It's because the Confucian traditional-minded scholars won the debate at court in 1433. Okay, because, and it's quite ironical, because China could have been much smaller if the Confucian scholar did not win the same kind of debate, but 16th century before, okay, 16 to 15 to 16th century before, because in 81 BCE, there was another debate called Yan Tie Lun, which is the debate or the discourse on salt and iron, having happened under the regency of Ho Guang during the childhood of Emperor Chao. The same kind of Confucian traditional but close-minded, I would call, Confucian scholars found that the state interventions in the expansion of the empire and the state intervention, more importantly, in the educational dimension for the people, were too costly. Okay, but thanks God, in 81 BCE, the more open-minded scholars won in 81 BCE, but unhappily, they did not win in the 15th centuries. That's why the fleet has been dismantled and the Chinese stopped their exploration and endeavor. Because, of course, we cannot remake history, and I'm a little bit biased because I have a Chinese cultural background, of course. But if China kept on that exploration endeavor, China, I think, would not have created the kind of European colonization which happened, but rather a kind of humongous commercial network. with China at the center, and probably with India and the Arabic-speaking nation at the center too. Okay, let's not forget that the center in that kind of world is not China, but the Indian Ocean. Okay, with India at the center, the Arabic country and Iran to the west, and China and Japan to the east. Okay, which is the maritime equivalent of the World Island, if you want. You probably know the theory of the World Island in terms of terrestrial powers. But if China succeeded that 15th century exploration and commercial endeavor, we would have a kind of maritime heartland center on the old Indian Ocean with Iran, the Arabic speaking, or the Ottoman Empire, because it was the Ottoman Empire at that moment, India and China and Japan, probably.
But the Silk Road was already running along the landmass, right? Eurasian landmass.
Absolutely.
So it was already a major commercial network, but you're saying it would have been bigger if it had the maritime component. That's
absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, but because let's not forget that under the Tang Dynasty, 618 to 907 AD, and under the Song Dynasty, 960 AD to 1273 AD, that maritime Silk Road existed, okay, between China, India, Japan, Iran, and the Ottoman Empire. So it's not a fake, it's not a product of imagination. It existed between 618 and 1273, meaning it existed for practically 7 to 8 centuries, okay? Because let's not forget that the first globalization had the Arabic-speaking people at the center of that globalization. Okay, they were full of Arabic-speaking people in Canton, Guangzhou, in China under the Song Dynasty and the Tang Dynasty. So, globalization is an old stuff. Okay, even going back to the land Silk Road of the Han Dynasty, 22 centuries ago, and not only the maritime. Starting with the Tang Dynasty and keeping with the Song Dynasty. So the tragedy with the dismantling of the Philip of Chenghe is rather that China, because of the close-mindedness of a faction of Confucian scholars, stopped that expansion of the maritime Silk Road, which existed since the 7th century AD. So that's for the first question. Your second question is absolutely outstanding, because it's a little bit shameful for me to answer to that question, because China is a country rooted in the epistemological development as proposed by the school of the scholars, the Ru-Jia, the Confucianists. Unhappily, unfortunately, when in the 19th century, because as always, okay, outside people cannot conquer us if we are not already rotten from the inside. Okay, it's the universal law of history. Okay, so unfortunately, the Chinese population lived a moment of deep decadence in the 1800s. Okay, the Opium Wars, 1842 to 1856. The century of humiliation between 1842 and 1949, the founding of the People's Republic of China. And that centuries of humiliation on the practical level was the direct result of spiritual and psychological unraveling and decadence having started somewhere around 1780 and 1850, okay? And the tragedy is that the beginning of the spiritual unraveling and of the psychological rotting coincide always with material splendor, okay? Because in 1780, either China or India were the two major economies in the world, okay? I think that some would say China, some would say India, but the difference is quite small, okay? So both those countries were living their material splendor at the time. And I think that both were beginning to enter their psychological and spiritual rotting or unraveling too. Okay, so it's a little embarrassing for me to answer that question, but truth is truth.
Thank you, Quan. And yes, India absolutely was the second biggest economy, and that's why it was looted as for the reasons that you mentioned, internal
Yes.
weakness. Yeah.
You certainly know that India was nicknamed the golden bird of Asia.
Sarah and Leo.
Hi, greetings to all. We had a dinner as we live in Europe, so we were off the screen. What's now? And several things to say. One is that I'm looking symbolically at this event with balloon. You know, balloon,
The balloon, yeah.
being pierced by a metal linear object, a balloon in the sky, which is kind of an image of completion and freedom. And I would say that Ludwig van Beethoven was an example of aristocratic mind. And a question would be, do you think that dreams reflect aristocratic component versus earthly component, as they can be prophetic and therefore coming from a timelessness,
Yes.
which realizes itself in the future, and or they can be very, not vulgar, but can be very base. And one more thing, because you may be able to tell me this. Some years ago, I have read Chinese saying that separating things into right and wrong is a disease of the mind. So there we go. Thanks.
I will start with your second question because it would be easier for me to answer that second question. Separating right and wrong is the disease of the mind. You are right if you're speaking at the level of the intellect, because the intellect can classify things as right or wrong in a superficial manner, and that sense is classifying things as right or wrong conceptually or intellectually is more prone to provoke useless dispute and war. But still, there is a right and there's a wrong. Okay, there is, if you go higher on your epistemological growth to the psyche, to the soul, to the cosmos, and to the self, you don't have to argue to go to right and wrong, because from the level of, at least, of a dialecticon of the aristocratic man, you have a direct vision of its right and wrong. Okay, and I would like to give you a practical example that I gave during my last presentation that I consider as the archetypical example. If you submit children under the age of 5 to an unfair situation, those children under 5 would react with anger and indignation because it's clear for them that it's a wrong and unfair. Okay, so there is a right and there's a wrong, but not at the intellectual level, at the stage 2 of the epistemological development, where you can play with words and concept, but at the level of the aristocratic man, of dialecticon, of direct vision, when you are inhabited by beauty and goodness, there is a direct vision of what is right and wrong. That's why people who are aristocratic man, when they speak sometimes and they are not careful with their words, they can be accused of being a tyrant, of being people not wanting to listen to everyone if yet they are not careful, okay, because they have a direct vision. So they have to be careful and soft. That's why there's the advice given both by Yuan and 23rd century later by Guo Moruo. You have to be unyielding and stern, but at the same time, you have to express it with gentleness. Because if you don't express it with gentleness and taking into account the epistemological development of the person to whom you speak, you can pass for a tyrant, and lose the opportunity to help someone advance in his own or her epistemological development. That's for one. And your second question, are dreams part of the epistemological development? Yes, because according to manuals of meditation on my own meditation practices and the meditation practices of others, when you reach a certain density of awareness, you are capable to be aware of your dreams, okay? Meaning that during the stage of dream, you are aware that you are dreaming during the dream, okay? And not because you remember it after you wake up. So because the density, the power, the energy of your awareness is such that thoughts are englobed, are seen by awareness, okay? Because let's not forget that time and timelessness coexist in us, okay? So thoughts are part of time, but if your mind is balanced, timelessness or pure awareness is at the center. And if your pure awareness is at the center, it's very easy to see the thinking process around the center. And let's not forget, it's like the sun at the center of the planets, if you want. The sun being the pure awareness and the planets being the thinking process, okay? So, the dreaming moment is only a moment of the mind mechanism, okay? Because in meditation and yoga, people would distinguish the mind during the waking time, the mind during the sleeping time, but the sleeping time is distinguished sleep without dreams and sleep with dreams. And finally, the mind unwavering and center in its true being, meaning pure awareness. And from that stage, the number 5, the stage of the aristocratic man, you can have lucid dreams, okay? Meaning that you are aware of your dreams when they are happening. And concerning self-fulfilling prophecy, as I explained in my presentation on the I Ching, the true poet or the true prophet or the true aristocratic man, because he's present at the present moment, he can see the seeds of everything happening now. So he will be capable to predict the future, not because there's a movie running in his mind or playing in his mind, but because he's aware of the seeds opening now and having consequences later.
Good.
Thanks.
I hope that answered.
Yes, of course it does. Yeah,
Yeah, it's good.
of course. I think I hope it helps everyone.
Yeah, no, that was unexpected. That was good. Thank you, Quan. Jerry, you're next up.
Okay, good. Thank you, Dr. Le. That was an excellent present. It's like we got a class on history and a class on poetry and a class on philosophy all together at the same time. It was beautiful. I really enjoyed it. And I have about 100 questions, but I'll only ask you one. When you were comparing the Roman Empire and the Chinese empire civilization, nation empire civilization, it brought up something I've been thinking about language. Now, unfortunately, I had to study Latin in high school. I studied it for 5 years. When I think of it now, I wish I had learned Chinese instead, but Latin as a language for me, I mean, when you think of Latin, you think of the Roman Empire. You really don't think of the language before then too much. And the way I was taught Latin, it was an administrative language. That's how they ran the empire. And they say, oh, but Latin had the Latin alphabet. It was very important. But the other parts of the empire, they all had different alphabets. And so it really, Latin wasn't really a cultural way to unify the empire. It was to administer it, like a bureaucrat or with the army. And so then I'm thinking about China, and okay, here's the complaint people have. Oh yeah, the problem with China is they don't have an alphabet. They use these characters. And I was talking to someone about it, and now correct me if I'm wrong. I could be way out on here, but the way it was explained to me, the way I kind of understood it, is that in Chinese, you have a character for a certain word. But in China, you can have like hundreds of different dialects, but they use that same character, even though they may say it, pronounce it differently depending on what their dialect is. And I was thinking, that's actually a better way culturally to unify your empire or your nation. So I just wanted to know if that idea is right or wrong, and if you could comment a little on it. Thanks again, Quan.
Thank you, Jerry, for your excellent question, because you gave the answer for the number one cultural explanation of the persistence of the Chinese empire, nation empire civilization through 24 centuries, okay, 22 centuries. But I would even dare to say through 30 centuries if I start from the Zhou dynasty, having begun in 1046 BCE, because those people were using that kind of characters who have been modified a little bit by the administration of the first emperor in the 221 BCE, of course, but basically it was the same stuff. So I would say that the Chinese language at the level of the elite, okay, it's more a language based on concepts rather than sounds, okay, because the excellent idea of the alphabet is that it reproduces sound, okay, so it doesn't reproduce concepts. And let's not forget that the alphabet has been invented at Ugarit, and Ugarit was a Phoenician city of the 13th century BCE, and those people were merchants, okay? So they were not philosophers or historians. They are not interested to peddle their concepts. They were interested to peddle their merchandise. So they wanted a stuff that can reproduce the sounds of the various people they were in contact with, and it was a truly outstanding invention, the alphabet, but it's not a tool for unity and for persistence of a culture through time, okay? And that's why the people who learned the alphabets from the Phoenicians, they use the same tool, if you want, for their own language and for their own concept, and not the same unique or the same unifying concepts with an S, okay? So absolutely, your insight gives you the number one reason why the Chinese nation empire civilization managed to maintain its mythology through 30 centuries, okay? Because at the core of any nation empire civilization, there is a mythology, okay? And the Chinese mythology is that we, the offspring of the Yellow Emperor, had many sages, kings in our past. And the last major one was King Yuan of the Zhou dynasty, having lived 30 centuries ago and having put in writing the major moral and epistemological steps that we have to follow in order to maintain our nation empire civilization. And because of that unique capacity of the Chinese characters to maintain its meaning in terms of concept through time, it was the number one control factor to maintain that nation empire civilization once again.
I have a quick question on the Yellow Emperor. Could you say a little bit more about the myth of the Yellow Emperor and the historical basis around which like what are the historical roots to this?
Yes, the Yellow Emperor, according to Chinese tradition, ruled from 2698 BCE. From that beginning, 2698 BCE, for about 50 years. Okay, 26 that time correspond historically to what the critical history would call the Longshan culture. Longshan. Okay, the culture Longshan means the mountain of the dragon. So the culture of the mountain of the dragon, having happened between 3000 BCE to 2000 BCE. Okay, the first royal dynasty having begun in around 2070 BCE, the Xia dynasty, and haven't lasted about 600 years. So, historically speaking, the Yellow Emperor corresponds to what the anthropologists and the historians would call complex society. Okay, what is a complex society? A complex society is a society having a hierarchy, having professional specialization, having inequality in wealth distribution. Okay, what we have nowadays, but multiplied by a billion. But it was the beginning of complex society in China in 3000 BCE, and having lasted for about a millennium, called the Longshan culture or the Longshan complex. And the Yellow Emperor was a legendary figure invented during the Warring State period, meaning around 400 BCE, but symbolizing what happened in reality. Okay, because during that time, you have different chiefdoms living in what we call the northern China nowadays, and having created the main cultural symbols of what is China today. Okay, so if we go by the written document criterion, the Chinese history is 36 centuries old. Okay, because the written document started with the Shangying dynasty, having begun in 1600 BCE. But there are many things in the cultural domain which started with the Longshan culture. So China has 36 centuries of history, but 50 centuries of continuous cultural matrix, starting with the Longshan culture and the Yellow Emperor, a legendary figure put at the middle of the Longshan millennium.
Yeah, it's interesting how in sort of the Western civilizational matrix, you have similar situations whereby you had not a lot that survived on the historical records, but we know that stories like Troy and whatever it was that occurred during the Greek Dark Age, and that led up into it, had a very big power, not only in organizing this sense of identity and cultural way of being of the Greeks, but also of the Romans. They had their story of Aeneas, of Troy, that also founded Carthage. So yeah, you have very, very similar principles operational between what you've just described in terms of the Chinese experience and the West on so many levels. It's very fascinating.
Wow, it's fascinating and at the same time obvious, because both the West and China managed to survive, and not only to survive, but to thrive and to be glorious. No glorious group can exist without a functional mythology.
Right.
And that functional mythology is the pathway to the Son of the Absolute. Because if you cannot have a leading group inhabited by truth, goodness, and beauty, that nation, empire, civilization would not persist through time, especially in a glorious manner, as the West has and as China has.
Right on. We have time for one last question before we unfortunately have to cut it off at 4:30. But John asked me to read aloud his question to you. He said, could the enormous quantities of silver that came from the Potosi mine have fueled the corruption that led to the loss of the mandate of heaven in the celestial kingdom that culminated in the 19th century?
Yes, it's possible, because let's not forget that all the gold and all the silver that have been, well, all is maybe a little bit too much, but many of the gold and silver ingots discovered in the New World, in Mexico and so on, uh, went to China. Okay, and that's the irony of history, because of the merchants and to buy Chinese stuff and the tea and the porcelain and all the products from China. And the irony of history, and I think that it's a very good question, because it illustrates greed. Okay, the gold and silver that has been extracted from the natives in North and Central America went in China because of greed on both sides, and that accumulated wealth in the material dimension corrupted in part. I would say it's not the only reason, but it's certainly one of the major reasons, corrupted the Chinese elite. And because of that spiritual corruption, they lost that gold and that silver. A very deep philosophical and historical lesson here.
Very good. All right, that was marvelous, as I knew it was going to be. You've given us a heck of a lot to think about, to research, to read, to study. I certainly would like to know, Quan, if you could send me some good quality translations in English of Guo Moruo. That would be something that I would include as links in the description box if possible.
I will send it to you in the next 5 minutes after the presentation. And I would like you also to put, if you want, the video on the China in the classics on the song of Chu, precisely on Chu Yuan.
Absolutely, that is a brilliant part of a brilliant series by CGTN. Highly recommend China in the Classics. Quan introduced me and Cynthia to this, and it's just fantastic. So I'll certainly include the reference link.
I send it to you Telegram.
We have it. It's fine. Yeah, I'll put that in there.
May I make a very quick comment? It's not really a question.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the question of this so-called spy balloon was raised, and never has it been mentioned that the speed of this balloon what would have been 10 kilometers an hour, and drones and satellites traveling at higher than the speed of sound probably have been around for decades. And yet the Western population has been so dumbed down that that the MSM is able to parlay this notion of a spy balloon. So I just thought I'd leave that there. But it's part of the hysteria that is generated against China. But
yeah.
Well,
Harinder, I think that your conclusion is excellent. It's an invitation to epistemological growth.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your superb presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Quan. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Next week, we're going to have Dr. Valeria Nolan, who's going to introduce her new book on Rachmaninoff, a new look at Rachmaninoff. She spent 30 years researching, speaking to Rachmaninoff's family, working in Russia. I mean, she's got a pretty comprehensive background and some original experience. So I'm sure she's going to bring up some very interesting points to the unappreciated components of the mind and creative process of Rachmaninoff. So that'll be next Sunday at 2 p.m. Until then, I hope everybody has a productive, creative week, and I'll see you all hopefully next Sunday.
Ciao.
Thank you.
Thank you, Quan. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Quan. Thank you, Matt.
Cheers.